We are live.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. We're delighted that you are joining us for this live webinar. You will be delighted with our presenters today who bring you very close to the people who are being most impacted by our environmental crisis. They are walking with them and so necessarily suffering with them. This is a rare moment because we are here from around the world and we all have the capacity, we all have a spiritual capacity for prayer or for radiating goodness. And so I want to take advantage of that. And I want to ask us for half a minute to drop down within us, and whether we identify as humanist or religious people, it doesn't matter. We have that spiritual capacity to bless our world and to ask to be changed so that we can be better servants. So let's move into silence, and in whatever form you desire, to ask for divine help or to radiate your own compassion, mercy, desire for change.
There's a smell that I'm trying to eliminate. If anything died.
Please unmute yourself, mute yourselves so that we don't have outside noise. Thank you. And so now let's draw our attention back together again as we begin our webinar. I want to take a few minutes at the beginning to point to the most recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was released 10 days ago. It's a 3,500-page document, and it was given to the UN Secretary General. He characterized it as a code red for humanity. And so we have this flashing red light that we have to stop. We have to change. We have to change ourselves. And there are many ways we can change ourselves. We certainly need to live more simply. And there are many ways that we can do that, implement that in our lives. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. But one of the ways that Pope Francis, in his second encyclical letter, Laudato Si, repeatedly stated is that we are interconnected. Everything we do and all of us as individuals are interconnected with others around the world, with all living beings, and with the living earth from which we came. God certainly created us from the earth. So that interconnection is something that I am hoping that today we'll be able to experience by opening our hearts to our panelists as they describe the people that they work with. Many times we read these reports about what's happening to the earth and we experience it directly. We know, we understand it, but as we learn about 80,000 climate refugees, 80 million, there are now 80 million climate refugees. We don't know who they are. We don't know their faces, their predicaments, their family situations, their daily fears and anxieties about where they will sleep, how they will provide for their children. And so it's in that context that this workshop will visit other people in other parts of the world who are much more vulnerable than we are in the United States. And I chose the speakers today because they are all from people who are they are all connected with people who are very much at risk, including Iona Connor, who has a coalition with many people in Africa. So let us move ahead. I've asked Liam O'Callaghan to go first. I'll read his bio. I think I will. Well, I seem to have misplaced the bio just this moment. So Liam, I'm going to ask you if you would to introduce yourself. Oh, actually, I came upon it. Imagine that. Oh. Liam O'Callaghan, who is the first of our presenters, is a Columban missionary working in Pakistan for over 20 years. Currently, the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Interreligious Dialogue Coordinator for the Columban missionaries in Pakistan. In recent years, he has been more and more involved in environmental work, both with Christian institutions and also people of other faiths, especially his Muslim and Hindu neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marita, and good evening to you all. It's nice to be with you and to share in this conference. So just a word of appreciation and congratulations to the organizers for bringing all this together as we attempt to respond to the crisis facing us. As Marita introduced me, I've been working in Pakistan for over 20 years now, and for the last 5 years, since I moved down to the southern province of Sindh, I've become more and more involved in environmental work, in environmental awareness work. And I suppose there were two main reasons for that, two pillars which underpin that work. One would be in the Catholic Church, the encyclical Laudato Si from Pope Francis in 2015. So that gave me a great impetus for this work. We set about translating this document into Urdu. And so for the first time, we had a really strong Catholic social teaching, compelling all religious Catholic institutions in the diocese to work on this issue. So it gave us great energy for that work. And with that, in 2015, maybe inspired by Francis or what, in preparation for COP15 in Paris, other religions like the Islamic Statement on Climate Change was issued in August 15, Hindu, Buddhist, and Jewish, and many other spiritualities had statements on climate change. So for the first time, you could say in a real sense, there was a great spiritual awareness among the religions to work on this issue of environmental protection and care. And the second pillar of our work is we always talk about the signs of the times. So in reality, in southern Pakistan and in Pakistan in general, the environmental crisis is really striking home in a big, big way. Floods and heat waves, unclean water, salinization of the soil, all sorts of environmental problems are really affecting the life of the people there, and especially the poor. So in that context, those are the two main foundational pillars for the work which we got more and more involved in over the last 5 years in particular. So now I'd like to share my screen. I want to begin. Oh, being at the end. Sorry about that. I want to begin by just having a brief look at the situation as I see it in Pakistan at the moment. And I start with a report from a German group called German Watch, and they produce a global climate risk index every year. But I'll focus on a 20-year index that they did covering the period of 1999 to 2018. So it's a 20-year period. And in that period, they list Pakistan as the 5th most vulnerable country in the world to climate change. And so that was really shocking, I suppose, for me, but it sort of gelled with my experience of all sorts of environmental disasters happening over the recent years. So how they came to this conclusion was they identified in that 20-year period 152 extreme weather events. Now, these are events which are way beyond what is not considered normal. Heat waves, flooding, drought, snowfall, and typhoons. And in the last 10 years, I would have certainly noticed the heating up is happening every year, year on year. In the last 2 years has been particularly difficult during the summertime, with temperatures 47, 48, sometimes in the mid 40s right through May and June. The monsoon rains have also been really pretty disastrous over the last 10 years. There have been major floodings in 2010 and 12, and last year in 2020 there was major flooding down in Sindh province as well. So they estimate that 10,000 deaths are a direct result of climate change and the effects of these climate events that they speak about. So that's about 500 per year over that 20-year period. So 10,000 deaths. And obviously the economic loss has been huge, billions and billions of rupees or dollars worth of damage. So just briefly, this is a shot from Karachi in 2015 through a major heat wave, which went over 50 degrees, and about 2,000 people at least died in that heat wave. So this is a shot from a hospital just as people were unable to cope with the extreme heat and enormous suffering happened. And again, the poor are the ones that suffer the most. With the heat comes extra flooding. So with more and more heat, you have more evaporation from the oceans, and that causes higher rainfall. So the monsoons are central to the agricultural life of Pakistan and India. And but over the last number of years, they've become more and more irregular and much more heavy downpours. So this is a shot from 2010 of just a massive flooding in northern Pakistan. And a further one here of Hyderabad city, where I live. This was last year. That's a signpost over a road. So the road is completely covered and up to the signpost of major flooding just last August 2020. So heat, flooding. This is a graph I took from, it was a Supreme Court ordered inquiry into the sanitation system in the all of Sindh province. And just one graph here is 75% of all water samples taken across all the districts of the province proved to be unfit for human consumption. So again, most people are drinking untreated water, which is simply unfit for human consumption. That's leading to all sorts of deaths and sickness constantly, and we see that in health and hospital. And again, poor people with no access to medication or proper filtering of water are drinking unclean water. So this is a figure we came across, which says that 80% of all illnesses and 40% of deaths in Pakistan are caused by unsafe drinking water. So again, it's just directly related. And that report highlighted that in the city I live in, Hyderabad, that there are 5 filter plants, but all 5 of them are not working. They're simply not working, and the water is coming untreated to all the homes in that city. And it's the same in all over the province. Pollution. A city like Karachi, which has 20 million people, about 2.5 hours from where I live, it's just chronic pollution from cars and factories, and so you can even see the pall of grey and blue. It's really deadly to be walking or driving in it. And an estimate from the Nature Journal is that air pollution causes the deaths of 110,000 people every year in Pakistan. So that's an estimate and a figure that they have produced. And side by side with the environmental crisis, one of the main, I suppose, factors, or a big factor, is the lack of forest cover. Experts would say that at least 20% of a country needs to be covered in forest to help in this whole environmental issue. So in Pakistan, it's as low as 1.9%, one of the worst percentages in the world. And that has a drastic negative effect on all of the environmental problems. So for example, heat is much worse when the forestry isn't there. Flooding is helped slow down somewhat if you have forestry there. Forestry will help in pollution, reducing pollution and noise levels. It's the biodiversity benefit. So the lack of forest cover is just exacerbating the problem in the country. So that's a brief summary of the situation as I see it in Pakistan, that this German Watch group have come up with the fact that over that 20-year period, Pakistan is the 5th most vulnerable country. And it's mostly poor countries who are affected, even though they're the ones not doing most of the polluting. And so based on that, the actual reality, the lived reality of the people there and what we see in Pakistan, we've become more and more involved in environmental awareness. And in the church, because of Laudato Si', we've attempted to, I work in the diocese as the ecological coordinator, and trying to get parishes and schools, institutions more aware of this issue, having seminars and programs with them, and trying to get people involved on the local level. So over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been involved in that work with the Christian churches, Catholic Church in the diocese, but also with school groups, with community groups, and working with these groups, trying to bring this new awareness to life. And over the last, we've chosen a theme for ourselves, which is called Friends of the Earth. So it's a pretty familiar, common understanding of environmental work. So we call all these groups that we work with in schools and communities Friends of the Earth. So we're training people to try to become aware of this issue, giving them awareness, giving them skills, ability to work on these issues. So the first slide here is schools. So over the last number of years, we've been working in many different schools. Some of them are Christian schools, some of them are government schools, Muslim schools. So we've been working with Muslim and Christian teachers, and Muslims and Christian, and some Hindu students in these schools as well. So it's a very much an interfaith effort. And we will bring that aspect in to try to make people aware that all of our religions, Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, is now speaking the same message. It's saying that we have a spiritual and a religious responsibility to care for this earth, that this is not just for us to use and abuse for our benefit. and that we have a responsibility to hand on the earth to future generations in a better way. So that's a very common teaching across the religions. So in these schools, we'd have seminars. We would work with some of the senior students over a number of seminars, 3 or 4 seminars, on the basic issues of pollution, what is pollution, on water, plastic waste, and then the practical issues of what we can do. So we help people, we can give out some cloth bags to help them stop using plastic bags. We bring them to nurseries to get them aware of the value of trees and how they can have, even in urban areas, to have certain plants which can help in their homes. So that's a whole awareness we're trying to do with school children, with teachers, so that this can become more a part of the syllabus in these schools. So this is another school situation. Again, we see Muslim and Christian children side by side in the classrooms. This is my colleague, Danish, a Pakistani, who's been working on this with us for many years, and a very good worker he is. This then is a situation where we've been working on interfaith. So one of my ideas, Marita there gave the title of my role as JPIC/IRD coordinator. So the idea is to work on JPIC issues, justice issues, or environmental issues from an interfaith perspective. Sometimes in the interfaith work, it can be difficult, especially with the whole extremism issue in Pakistan, that sometimes speaking about religion or doctrine can be difficult, confrontational, not very productive. And Christians are a very, very small minority, Hindus as well, 1.6 and 1.7%. So it can be difficult in that sense. So the idea is to try and work together, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, on these common issues. So not particularly in any way speaking about faith or doctrine. Now that can come from it later once the relationship is built up, but it's more working on these common issues. And as I said, more and more, because of the need and because of some funding that we've got for environmental issues and projects, we have tended to be working more on environmental issues. So this is a group that we had in 2018, and again we've tried it in 2019, and we work with Muslims, Hindus, and Christians together, trying to become aware of the issue of the environmental crisis in Pakistan. What can be done? How can we protect our families to begin with, by drinking clean water, by using less plastic, by all the various things that we can practically do. And then hopefully people will spread out into their own communities and spread that message. So it's just a vision of how we can bring this together from an interfaith point of view. So that's just briefly something of the issue that we've been looking at and our attempted response to it. And, I suppose just looking at Fratelli Tutti, again, as I said, Laudato Si for me is the big inspiration in terms of what Pope Francis is trying to do. And an interesting thing about both of these encyclicals is that he addresses them both not to the Catholic Church or Catholic bishops as they have been in the past, but is to everybody, to all faiths and none. So it's speaking to all who live together in this planet, because he says that we have only got one common home, one planet, and we have to work together to protect it. And Fratelli Tutti then is going beyond, I suppose, the environmental concerns and speaking about human fraternity. I mean, in the Laudato Si, it's also there, where it's not just the abuse of the planet and destroying our environment, but we are destroying peoples as well. That the inequality in economic, the spread of wealth is so unjust and unfair. The whole migration issue and poverty, like Pope Francis is always speaking about it is the poor who suffer the worst, and that is so true. In all of these situations, be they Muslim, Christian, or Hindu, it's the poor who cannot afford medication, who cannot afford filters for clean water, and they are the ones to suffer. So Fratelli Tutti is bringing that bigger justice question, that human fraternity element into play, the social friendship that we need to work together, that we are brothers and sisters, we have a common home, and it is only together that we can find solutions to these problems. And I suppose the rediscovery of love, it's ultimately love is the basis on which we work on these issues to share, work for justice, and to protect our environment. So I think I'll leave it at that for the moment, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Liam. And this is so inspirational to see the faces of these people of different faiths that you have brought together to understand how we have to share with each other information and abilities that techniques even to protect one another, and to both adapt and to care for the earth. So it's wonderful seeing their faces, seeing the children. It's my hope that as a result of this seminar, that we will all become more global citizens, and that it will be a motivation for us to let go of some of the resources we use for our own pleasure, and contribute to others. And now I'd like to introduce all of you to Nicole Insuasti, who I've met in the last year and am so impressed with. Nicole Insuasti has a degree in political science and international relations. She's coming to us from Ecuador, where she works as a young leader and activist who promotes human rights, especially for Indigenous communities. She worked for an NGO represented on the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, where she collaborated with others to guarantee sustainable development in Ecuador, and specifically access to water and land for Indigenous people in rural Ecuador. Welcome, Nicole, and unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marita, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share what was the work, and also the work that in the middle of the pandemic we have here with the Indigenous community. So thank you for the space, and I will start. So welcome to everyone to this space. I want that, and I expect that it has interactive conversation, because this is the way that we work with Indigenous communities. As I said some weeks ago to Marita, this is the way the Indigenous people accept us from their lands, to share what are their perspective and what are their problems. And I am very interested to know what all the speakers are talking about, and especially about environment or climate action. So Indigenous peoples are the principal person that contribute with these aspects. So I think that we can identify, and I expect that my English is improving. So I will start. I will share my screen. So, and I hope that you are available to see the video that I will show you. Yes. A video that is from the first side event that I present at the United Nations in the year 1820, So it's like a couple of years ago. It was a permanent forum of Indigenous issues. The topic was access to land and how we can contribute with access to water, to access to also natural resources. I hope that you enjoy this video and keep in your mind how is the challenge that these communities have. This is especially in the Andean region of Ecuador. That is the place that I was working, and before the pandemic. Now is the work that I am doing is here in Quito, in the way that we have virtual mode, but it's important to remember again, to explore and also think about these territories. So I will share. Well, thank you for the attention to this video, and I want to share this other perspective that we have about Indigenous women exactly engage with the climate action or environmental project. Indigenous women play a key role into the communities and into the society about the transmission to their culture, their traditional knowledge, and all the natural resources that we have in this in our earth and around the creation. So in this part, I will talk about to the gap and the access to social protection for Indigenous women and girls. We will see other video. All this video I did with the communities. I went to the communities and worked with the communities. So Indigenous people and their communities know and want to show what they are doing without the support from the governments or states. So we will see the voice from Ecuador, especially direct to the Indigenous women. We will see also the difference to rural and urban areas, the Indigenous language, and the traditional knowledge. So as Marita said, a wonderful opportunity and blessing to go to the United Nations a couple of years before. I went there and I bring all the perspectives and realities to there, especially with the Indigenous communities, Indigenous people at the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues that is at the UN. So we will see here the rural areas. What happened when in the rural areas, Indigenous communities and especially Indigenous women feel this gap and suffer this lack to access to public services. So in the first perspective, we have that in the rural areas, the Indigenous women suffer the lack of access to social protection in education, health, gender equality, and promotion of their traditional knowledge. When we talk about traditional knowledge, where are we talking about? We are talking about the cultural heritage, the knowledge of medicine, the properties of plants, the transmission of the language, and especially with the ancestral symbols. Here we have a gap because this traditional knowledge, when the Indigenous women or their families migrate to the cities, it have really don't accept to these cities. We have the challenge that we have cultural contribution. For example, the childbirth and fertility, it's now a way to conversation, to put in discuss, to have like a debate, you know, like what is good or not for the health. We have also that Indigenous ancestral justice, way like justice, almost always led by women. All these process like traditional knowledge are stopping when they migrate to the cities. So we have to recognize that they were before us in the territories in Latin American, and they have all these natural resources before, and all the appreciation to them, to all these natural resources before that we are here. So we have to recognize and maintain in dialogues. So we have to get their conversation, their knowledge. So we have to start to think about it. We have the weight that the cause of migration to the urban areas, to the cities. Especially, we have two kinds of migration. The first one is the voluntary, that is not the real reality in Ecuador or the communities around in the Andean region, but it's one of the voluntary migration is to see that better economic opportunities. The other one, social service and facilities for education, health, and technology. And I want to share this phrase because it's what I feel when they talk about when they are in the cities, from the land itself to the land of others. So the other urban migration is voluntary, that is result of the environmental degradation that has destroyed traditional livelihoods. It's not always that indigenous people want to go to the cities, like to access to public services or what else, but we have this big problem that is a result of the environmental degradation and climate action. So climate change. So we have the disposition of land due to corporate land capture, climate change, displacement. We have unemployment, lack of social protection for public services. So we have this problem that is migration, especially in focus on indigenous communities, that is a reality. Now we will see what happened with indigenous youth, especially indigenous young women. We have the problem that when they migrate to the cities, they have lack of access to public services, labor exploitation, gender inequality, racism, and I want to share what they have like really, really interesting resource and cosmovision, that is the traditional knowledge in indigenous language. First, as I said, indigenous women have a key role within their village in terms of intergenerational transmission of their spiritual tradition, history, philosophy, territory, and natural resources. We know that grandmothers give and transmit all the knowledge that from the plants to the others indigenous generation. So it's important to recognize, because now we are going to the language that is also part of my presentation. So I want to share that this is the way that they live, that they give us their tradition. So and it's stopping, and it's also seen like a problem from the lands. We have a good policy, or this is what I want to say. Indigenous communities here in Ecuador, they are approved or recognized by the Constitution. But it is not only the reality in Ecuador. We have around the world that not all the indigenous people or communities are recognized by the Constitution. So they don't have any policies that represent to them. to them and nothing at all about their lands. So we have also the transmission of the language of their communities. This is a reaching contribution that should be appreciated. Okay, so now we will see a video that I want that you also give in your mind and enjoy what is the social protection and what the indigenous, what the indigenous people think about the indigenous communities, how they can help us to give a perspective, so how we can support to them also with our activism.
Nosotros somos una mujer de capacidad, una mujer que nosotros sí podemos, sí respetamos a los hombres, pero tenemos la igualdad de género y nosotros sí podemos apoyar en toda actividad, si somos capaces de participar en toda la actividad y con mucho respeto a los hombres. Entonces las mujeres indígenas tenemos, con nuestro idioma, con nuestra vestimenta, con nuestra costumbre que tenemos la capacidad de presentar en alguna actividad.
En el caso de los Andes, la mujer es como el sinónimo de la madre tierra, ¿no? Eso implica, digamos, tener una idea de veneración hacia la mujer, ¿no es cierto? Y por esa razón es que se desarrollaron muchos rituales.
Yo igual pinto, soy pintor y hago unos bordados, tejidos. Igual aquí un poco de comida típica del pueblo indígena, la gastronomía indígena.
Kay ñukunji wawa una munda ñukago doño ñukunji nanji kichwa doño cosa. Chay ñukago wawa munda ñukunji igual respeto karigas warmigas wawa una munda wasi okubiga igual ta respeto rande munda respeto kausenji.
Con el tiempo, digamos, todo esto y con la colonia y la república se va degenerando, ¿no es cierto? Porque la visión occidental, ¿no? La religión occidental influye y va destruyendo, digamos, estas visiones y va generando muchas frustraciones en nuestras poblaciones, ¿no? Por los niveles de violencia, de explotación, y va, digamos, también incorporándose el machismo.
Hay a veces los hombres quieren salir más adelante y las mujeres, pero sí siguen luchando.
Tenemos el conocimiento como mujer indígena. Antiguamente no era valorada las mujeres, eran después de los hombres. Gracias a Dios por preparación, por conocimiento. En el momento ritual de una mujer somos una mujer que podemos participar en alguna dignidad y alguna actividad que realice en la comunidad. Y estamos previstos para colaborar como una mujer indígena.
No hay discriminación de hombres y mujeres. Igual derecho, igual lo que es trabajo, lo que es seguir adelante, eso sí.
Entonces, todo esto es necesario entenderlo, ¿no? Trabajarlo, estudiarlo, sistematizarlo más, para que le demos la real dimensión, ¿no? De lo que es la importancia de la mujer, porque además cuando ustedes vayan a cualquier comunidad, ¿no? Van a ver que las mujeres tienen mucha vitalidad, ¿no? Y creo que eso es una característica casi en todos los pueblos del mundo, ¿no? Entonces para nosotros es muy importante seguir estudiando, ¿no? La importancia del rol de la mujer en lo que es la cultura de los pueblos indígenas.
Aquí entre las mujeres, el grupo de mujeres, trabajar y seguir adelante y así sucesivamente a los futuros y nuestros nietos, nuestros hijos también, que siga valorando nuestra cultura y nuestra cultura y nuestro arte.
So now we will talk about a little bit more, because I know that my time is going to over. So I will share a couple of ideas about the indigenous language that is all other part. But before this, I want to share especially a key words about the indigenous people and climate change, that it is the poverty, okay? The climate change affects specific with indigenous people to increase the poverty, the gender inequality, the access to lands, migration, and access to public services, and space into the public politics, sorry, and also the space to formal norms and rules for there. So I want to share a final video that is about the language. It was for the permanent, also was side event at the UN. When I was in New York, I prepared this video, this content also, that was for the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, especially 2 years ago, the 1920, that was the International Year of the Indigenous Language. So we have this space with the Permanent Mission of Bolivia and Permanent Mission of Philippines to contribute with this side event. So it was called Language as the Lifeline of Indigenous Identity and Transmission of Culture, an upper discourse. So first, we have to keep in our mind that the language is identity around the world. That is important to recognize the protection and transmission of the indigenous language through the education, engage with the education. So this support and also improve the revitalization of indigenous culture and indigenous communities. It also help to increase the traditional knowledge and also involve to improve with the sustainable development. So to ensure that no one is left behind. So now we will share this video. That is one of my favorite videos that resume and also analyze a really good perspective that we keep in our feelings, and also in our if we think about indigenous communities and in the space of territories or amendment, we have to recognize. So it's the same structure of the last video, but it's about specifically of the indigenous language.
Hawaii, 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 Hawaii. Bueno, el quichua es una lengua, ¿no?, que ha logrado mantenerse a través de la historia. Es una lengua de resistencia, ¿no? Y el mismo hecho de que haya logrado mantenerse tantos siglos a pesar de todas estas adversidades debe ayudarnos a tomar conciencia de que no es una civilización cualquiera y que por lo tanto tenemos que asumir el reto, ¿no?, de comprender esas fortalezas.
amato kurichun ideoguna ima sentar ponogonada rico chijoneme hawa ciudad cao Sevilla grano gonas por fonegasca Kaibigan yung kundi grano gonada meko funji campo tarpsaga kai grano mekso yung kundi corpo bes ong sabes chinchi hatari honji chinchi puri honji y ciudad grano gona meksaga débil de ong sabes rato ongs rato imas toko con rato idas rato 650 veces ya ese rato ongo con ya ida gona daño ko gona ma paste honeme imas en kaosana imas en tarpono gona chiuna de con paste honeme yo katai tomo mogon imas en
¿Dónde viven los niños? ¿De qué comunidad vienen los niños? Entonces, la lengua materna como raíz principal debemos tener en cuenta, desarrollar en nuestro idioma.
Yo canché quichuata rexichinchi a través de cuadro pintascapi, yo canché ropa caosaipe, yo canché palabra quichua remanata, manasa 15 y comunidad con ape participante, ascata participante puro quichuape. Entonces, igual conamos rexichinchi, lo mismo, yo canché causa icuna, yo canché imagina cuadro das pintanche ropa indígena. Chinarate fiesta con api chay causay con esta yo canchi huevo con amor rexicate honchi chay yo canchi palabra quichua maternamente ama chingallo y chay con esta rexicate honchi huevo con ama y yo casi tiene ahí contento que hay tapi
ser conscientes de que ha sido tanto el sistema colonial como el sistema republicano los responsables de este debilitamiento, ¿no?
Bueno, en la ciudad yo creo que no, mejor salen a la ciudad, va perdiendo nuestras costumbres, nuestros idiomas, lo que nuestros abuelos han dejado sembrando. Eso tenemos que fortalecer y seguir adelante.
Necesitamos extirpar, ¿no?, de la conciencia de nuestras poblaciones esa ideología que el sistema colonial y republicano sembró en la mentalidad de toda la sociedad, ¿no? Entonces, esa ideología está muy en la conciencia, en el subconsciente de toda nuestra sociedad y de manera particular en nuestras poblaciones, ¿no? Porque el sistema enseñó a que tengan vergüenza de su lengua, de su identidad. Entonces, si queremos nosotros que estas lenguas se fortalezcan, ¿no?, se desarrollen más, y de una manera mucho más activa, necesitamos que nuestras poblaciones superen esa ideología que está enraizada, ¿no?, en su conciencia y se liberen de esa ideología, ¿no? Y eso sea suplantada por recuperar, ¿no?, su orgullo identitario y fundamentalmente el orgullo lingüístico, ¿no? Porque el momento en que nuestras poblaciones recuperen ese orgullo lingüístico, entonces será mucho más fácil impulsar procesos educativos y también procesos de reivindicaciones de carácter político y también académico.
Entonces, la realidad, nosotros debemos demostrar de dónde nacimos, de dónde somos la raíz indígena, difundir a todas las comunidades que no olvidar nuestro idioma materna.
Bueno, a nuestros hijos que vienen atrás tenemos que mantener y que conversando en quichua, en vestimiento, en comida, en no dejar a nuestros hijos que pasen, que vayan olvidando nuestras culturas, nuestros idiomas, que vayan manteniendo. Tenemos que recuperar, rescatar a nuestros padres, nuestros antepasados, nuestros abuelitos. Somos indígenas, tenemos que sentir orgullo.
Los pueblos orgullosos de su identidad y de sus lenguas, de sus culturas, eso permite que seamos más originales, ¿no?, y que no seamos tan copiones, ¿no?, porque en todos estos siglos lo único que hemos hecho es copiar todo lo que Occidente ha venido desarrollando. Y la importancia radica primero porque tenemos que entender que una lengua, ¿no?, es la razón de ser de un pueblo, ¿no? De una cultura, de una civilización, de que en el pueblo está el corazón, ¿no? La razón de ser, ¿no? De una civilización. En la lengua se expresa la cosmovisión, la filosofía de una sociedad específica, se expresan sus formas de vida, ¿no? Y desde ese punto de vista es muy importante que las lenguas se mantengan.
Lamentablemente nuestros antepasados no tenían una educación. ¿Y cómo transmitían? ¿Cómo ellos transmitían? A través de la pintura, a través de cuentos, mitos, leyendas, a través de cantos también. Entonces todo eso nos iba transmitiendo a nosotros.
Y nosotros queremos recuperar lo que tenemos de aquí, como territorialmente. Tema de vestimiento, tema de fiestas de antiguos, temas de historias, culturas, entonces nosotros no queremos perder.
La filosofía, ¿no? Pensada desde esta idea de valorar y respetar a la Madre Tierra es fundamental tanto para las generaciones actuales como para las futuras, porque eso ayudaría muchísimo incluso al tema del mismo desarrollo, ¿no? Eso es lo que nos ayuda a particularizarnos de otras culturas, de otras civilizaciones, ¿no?
Dar a conocer al mundo nuestra identidad, nuestro idioma, decir aquí estamos.
Entonces, lo que nos corresponde a las generaciones actuales es entender, ¿no? ¿Por qué? ¿En qué consiste esa vitalidad, ¿no? Porque la razón de ser, digamos, ¿no? La filosofía que está implícita en este caso, ¿no? En la cultura quichua, puede ayudarnos a ser mejores personas, ¿no? Mejores ciudadanos también.
So thank you very much for this time to share, and I just want to finalize with this project that we are doing now with the group of Indigenous women and Indigenous child and young people. So language is as an education. Sorry, it's our principal motivation with Sister Mary Ivers. When a language is extinguished, it carries with it all that memory, all that history, all that science. So we are now engaged, and we are also very, very conscious that because of the pandemic, it didn't stop us, and we are continuing with the projects. We can go to we go to the lands, but we are working with them. With a project. I want to show that we are working with the indigenous communities in Ecuador, especially with indigenous women. That we are doing natural oils from the natural resources with a project that is Seda y Cacao, that is an entrepreneurship from the lands in the Andean region, Ibarra, and the cacao on all these natural resources are a strategy that indigenous women can to learn and also practice this traditional knowledge. Okay, and we have this every weekend. We transmit like through Facebook, and also we are continuing working with indigenous women, like videos, and they practice. And also we have this is the products of the Seda cacao that is from the cacao. Okay, plants. And we have also the other project that is indigenous children and young people, that is a class that we have every weekend. Every Sunday we have class Quechua idioms, class of Indian Quechua, French and English. So they are keeping and also continue learning. Now we are in now we are in a vacational program. So thank you very much for your attention, and I am really open to any question or comment, and I'm really glad to share all this wonderful work. And thank you very much. I'm sorry to pass my time. I want to really share 3 of the videos that Marita asked me to share. So thank you, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Nicole. You brought us really right to the heart of the Indigenous dilemma right now. And I know there are several questions we want to ask, but we'll wait until the end so that we know how much time we have for questions. And also, I want to remind everyone that each of these presentations are rich with a lot of information and shared experience. And you can go back and review these videos because they will be on the YouTube channel. And now I want to introduce Joanne Blaney, who I'm so grateful is here with us today from Brazil. Joanne Blaney sent me the following introduction. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis reminds us of universal fraternity, a world where there are no others, no them. There is only us, the earth and its people. Joanne Blaney is a Maryknoll lay missioner and has worked with marginalized communities in Brazil for 25 years. She will reflect upon Fratelli Tutti's message in light of the dramatic increases in the destruction of the Amazon, invasions of indigenous territory, illegal mining and logging, as well as the increased urban violence, mass incarceration, and levels of poverty. How can we work together to bring gospel values and a cosmovision of interconnectedness and inclusion to this reality of injustice, marginalization, exploitation? Joanne will share her experience as one path in working with people of all faiths and spiritualities in trying to build a culture of encounter, engaging in collective processes of listening and dialogue that bring healing, help to transcend divisions and build community, solidarity, and responsibility. Joanne works with restorative justice practices and reconciliation with groups in conflict in the prison system and with those affected by crimes in neighborhoods. The goal is to build a participative model of inclusion that mobilizes groups to actively engage in working to change unjust structures and build a more just and nonviolent global community. And now, Joanne, please proceed.
Thank you, Marita. And let me say, it is an honor and a privilege to be here today. And I'm already extremely grateful for the rich sharings from Liam and Nicole. And I hope that I can contribute in some way to this conference. And I'd like to start out by sharing the screen as well.
Good.
Is everyone able to see?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll talk about my work and the work that I do with many others. I work on teams all the time, teams, and here in Brazil. And one phrase of Fratelli Tutti that I think is essential for us, and something that we know in our heads, but I'm not sure that at least I know in deep in my soul, but the awareness that Pope Francis calls us to develop this awareness that we are either all saved together or no one is saved. And of course, poverty, decadence, and suffering in one part of the earth are a silent breeding ground for problems that will end up affecting the entire planet. And I hope to show that, showing a bit work in an incredibly urban environment, a mega city of Sao Paulo with 21 million people in the larger Sao Paulo area, as well as work with climate and environmental issues that are totally interconnected. They're not separate, as we see here. These are breeding grounds for problems. And so just a little bit about the reality of Brazil, 2021. Brazil has been horribly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, 570,000 dead because of that. 20 million people are living in extreme poverty. Hunger and unemployment have increased incredibly. 87% of Brazilians live in cities right now. And 40 years ago, over a 40-year period, Brazil was 82.5% of the population lived in rural areas. Today, we are looking at 87% of Brazilians in cities and urban environments. The incredible migration where people left rural areas because they pretty much could not survive due to droughts, due to flooding, due to crop failures, due to movements by agribusiness to take over land. So this incredible migration that has taken place and has led to the photo that you see behind this chart, that this is Sao Paulo, where we have incredible social inequality. We have condominiums where each person has a swimming pool on, each family has a swimming pool on the floor of their condominium. And then we have most people, over 3 million people living in incredibly degrading housing conditions. And we now have 36.2% of Indigenous peoples who live in urban areas. There's been a systematic and continuous increase in violence against Indigenous people since the current president took office, but it is compounded by the fact that it is also supported by the not just the executive, but by Congress and by the judicial system to open up, principalmente the Amazon area, to invasions of Indigenous lands, illegal mining and deforestation, clearing Indigenous forests for soy products, cattle, for beef, all for exportation. And this is connected to what we see in the big cities: mass incarceration, racism, and violence against women. So just, Marita already read this, that universal fraternity is certainly a call to us from Fratelli Tutti, that really there are no others, no them. There's only us, and us as humans, and us as creation, as the planet, as Earth. And I work in a human rights and popular education center, as well, working with some faith groups. And we have worked hard to have a politics for the common and universal good. Now, of course, we're not speaking about party politics, political parties, but that we practice political love by working collectively to try to integrate the economy with the social and cultural fabric into a consistent and life-giving human project. These are not our words, these are the words of Fratelli Tutti, but it makes sense of what we've been trying to do with these collective projects, bringing the community together over the years. And we know that the Amazon's cry of pain is also the urban cry of the streets. In Sao Paulo, we have almost 25,000 people living on the streets just like this each evening. So a culture of encounter, and this connects very well to what we've been working on for years, since about 2005, in our work with restorative justice and in our work with popular education, that we bring people together for encounters, collective encounters, where it is listening and dialogue, and the hope is that we're bringing healing. We're helping to transcend divisions and build community, solidarity, and responsibility. And in a little bit, I'll talk about some practical things that we've done, as well as this participative model of inclusion. And this connects very much to Paulo Freire, a Brazilian who worked with popular education for many years in Brazil. And it's a participative model that is dialogical, that people come together and they're able to share their own experience within a collective and then join in together to work to change principally unjust structures and heal relationships. And Francis points to this time and time again in Fratelli Tutti, that these are experiences of solidarity which grow up from below, from the subsoil of the planet, human beings, where we can come together, we can help coordinate and form collectives, keep on meeting one another to be active participants in society. And so the question of mass incarceration and what that has to do with restorative justice, and Francis' question and absolutely beautiful reflection in Fratelli Tutti about who is the stranger on the road. In Brazil, Brazil has the third largest prison population, with murder rates more than double the US. Many of the prisons are run by criminal factions. Overcrowding is one of the main problems, as well as insufficient food, not enough water, lack of health care, and overall degrading conditions, physically as well as humiliating folks. And so here's a prison. I work with the prison ministry pastoral, and this was a visit to a prison, and many of the cells, this is a larger cell, but many of the cells only have a few beds, and then this is what you see when you go. And you can see folks are just pretty much waiting and hoping that someone will help them in some way, whether it be an encounter of a visit, whether a need, a physical, mental, or spiritual need that they have, or just the need to get decent sleep and decent food. This is another prison where you can see again some of the degrading situations and chaotic scenes, basically. And COVID-19 has made this much worse, as the groups who work in prisons, whether they be the prison ministry pastoral or other educational groups, since last March, we have not been able to enter the prisons in Sao Paulo. And many families were not permitted to visit as well, due to what the prison authorities said were health concerns. But what messages are coming out of the prisons are horrific about the conditions that are taking place, since there are hardly any visits or none at all in most of the prisons. So there's a 54.9%, 55% overcrowding capacity in Brazilian prisons. 32% of people in prison who have been in prison for some time have not had a judgment on their case. So sometimes they are there for 15 days imprisoned until a judgment comes up. Sometimes they are there for a year and a half, or even longer, until they're called for judgment. And the sense of social injustice leads to a lot of anger. And we work with restorative justice in the prisons and basically working to try to help people be restored to oneself, and then restore relationships within the prison, helping to have more humanized conditions. And I'll talk in a little bit about what the restorative justice aspect leads to. So restorative justice, a new paradigm, changing lenses. Restorative justice is based in Indigenous ways of dealing with conflict and with crime, with what the Western world would call crime. And Howard Zare is a person out of the Mennonite University who phrased it, it's a change of lenses. We have plenty and plenty of research that shows the punishment and vengeance system that we use only causes people to become more violent, and locking people up in these degrading conditions contributes greatly to this anger and desire for vengeance afterwards. And so restorative justice based on the wisdom, not just the way Indigenous people have dealt with conflicts and crime, but also based on their wisdom, the cosmovision of we are one with the ancestors, we are one with the earth. We put these aspects into practice in our work with restorative justice. And it's based on, and these are some phrases written here from chapter 7 of Fratelli Tutti about the importance of dialogue. And restorative justice practices, whether we're working with conflicts in the community or with victims and offenders of crime, it's based first of all on truth telling, which is very different sometimes from our penal system where my lawyer will tell me not to admit to anything. So it's based on truth telling, it's based on assuming individual responsibility, but it's based also on collective responsibility. We know that many aspects of conflicts and crimes happen because of some of these structural problems that we have of racism, violence against women, against children. So restorative justice also looks at that to help bring those voices into the dialogue. And it deals with past misencounters, historical violence, so that we move from the past to the present to build another future. And we're trying to restore people to themselves, whether they be victims, offenders, or people in conflict in whatever way, and restore relationships in some way, as well as return people to be able to, whether it's a victim or offender of someone suffering from a conflict, be able to reintegrate back into society. So restorative justice includes accompaniment, networks of accompaniment. We see now that when people are released from prison in Brazil, sometimes their family doesn't want them back, whether they're youth in conflict with the law or adults, or other times they're welcomed back by their family, but no one will give them a job. No one will help them find different ways. So with restorative justice, it's dealing with what happened, admitting responsibility, including people, the network of collective responsibility, and trying to integrate everyone back and working up an accord, victim and offender work up how to repair the harm. So we know, and Francis says it again, that conflict is inevitable on the road to peace. And we cannot escape these conflicts. So we try to work with varied levels of conflict and violence. Some of it is intrapersonal. It's personal that I have suffered in the past and I may continue to be violent. And I'm speaking of violence in a very broad sense of the word, not just related to crimes, but violent words, violent actions, exclusions, omissions. Sometimes it's relational, and that's what we mostly see in the headlines. This person did this to that person, or this group did it. But we try to look at what are the institutional, social, and cultural underpinnings of why this violence is continuing. So for social and cultural, it may be a society where women are not considered equal, so it's okay to have violence against women. It may be a society where everyone says we are not racist, when in reality there are racist structures that keep people back. So the idea is to work with these structures, and most of these learnings are from Indigenous peoples related to restorative justice. So we have worked, we had a restorative justice community conference to bring restorative justice into neighborhoods and communities, in which over 100 people from Brazil participated. And we worked a lot. There were a number of Indigenous representatives, people who came and contributed greatly to this conference, that we now work on racism with restorative justice. We now work on structural violence. We now are teaming up with Indigenous facilitators of restorative justice, mostly to learn from them how to do these circles of dialogue or encounter. And so on the left is a group meeting, and we're trying to work up a response to a conflict, a large conflict that this group is having. The same on the right, the photo on the right is doing that. We also do a lot of training of what we call multipliers of these circles. So the circles can be circles to resolve conflict, circles of dialogue, so that we improve tolerance in areas where there's, in groups where there is a lot of intolerance. They can be varied types of circles using restorative justice, but the basis is everyone has a moment to speak using a talking piece, and then we keep quiet for the rest of the time, so that we are building constructively a way to resolve the issue that we're talking about. Something else that our center is very involved in relates to the connection between the environment and the injustice that is taking place, the urban injustices that include a lot of urban violence, police violence in urban areas, mostly among 4 young Afro-American, Afro-Brazilian men. And this is also a characteristic of the prison system, that Afro-Brazilian men are most targeted in the prison system and are mostly in the prison system. And this would be very similar to the question of race as well in the US. So in this photo, we're seeing the 3 of us from the center. And as you can see behind, there's incredible environmental degradation with folks figuring out a way that they can get electricity, as well as a sewage system that goes into this little stream that is there. So we do a lot, we're doing a lot of work with making the connection between urban violence issues, urban habitation issues, as well as the environment and taking care of our common home. So focusing on recycling, on caring for water, organic gardens, trying to build organic gardens, using recycled materials to make crafts, to make furniture, and then calling together the folks in the neighborhood as well for these aspects, but for an aspect to join together in a community way to demand public policies that will deal with these habitation problems and with these environmental problems. So action is a big part of everything that we try to do, no matter what circle we're in. The facilitators are going out to other communities. And the idea is that in the end, whether it's a circle of conflict or dialogue, we try to get people involved in working on these structural issues to try to change public policies. So this is a picture of a march. It's called the 24th year of the Walk for Peace. And this is the neighborhood where our center is. And the neighborhood, in a grand way, because the city has 21 million people, this neighborhood includes some about 1 million people. So it's a lot of people. And 25 years ago, the neighborhood came together because of the lack of services, the incredible violence in the neighborhood, the lack of public response. And today we still continue to meet 100 groups that represent churches, social projects, environmental projects, ecological projects, meeting once a month to take action in the neighborhoods and help those people who are suffering the most. This was started by a group of, by 2 Spiritan priests in conjunction with the center where I work. As I said, we're up to the 25th year this year, and it's a walk for peace. And it ends with an ecumenical service in a cemetery where the city calls an indigent cemetery, where many people are buried there without names, unfortunately. Some work with people in situations of homelessness as well. This is a project that folks go out at night and they get donations from businesses sometimes, or they literally go through trash and they take out things that they can recycle and that they can use to make crafts to then help the people in situations of homeless in the neighborhood. So it's a very exciting project, and it's a way that folks can move on and finally leave their situation of homeless, but continue to help others who are in situations of homelessness, as well as working for public policies to help those. We have weekly faith celebrations with this project that include people who are living on the streets, situations of homelessness, as well as the workers. And this would be, this is what we would call our base Christian community. And just quickly, the connection between this and the Synod for the Amazon, our common home. These are, here is Pope Francis, who is welcoming people at the Synod. And in Brazil, after the Synod, we have taken it in almost every parish and every community. We have taken it to see, to the aspect of see, judge, and act. What can we do related to Indigenous issues? What can we do to what is happening in the Amazon and other parts of Brazil? Wetlands in Brazil are being destroyed. The Cerrado is also being destroyed because of land invasions. So in cities and throughout the country, the bishops have a campaign that has been working since the Synod on the Amazon to look at these connections between urban and Indigenous and rural issues. And this is a group of, this is the Amazon River in the city of Manaus in Amazonas. And these are a group of Indigenous people who, through coffins, putting the coffins in the water to return to Mother Sea, are symbolizing the horrific destruction that is happening in the Amazon area with the complicity, total complicity of the federal government. And one aspect that has been horrific is the effect of COVID on Indigenous communities, as well as an increase in the last 2 years of suicide rates of Indigenous people in Brazil, with a 50% increase of suicide rates among children between the age of 10 and 13. So it's a tragic, tragic situation happening throughout the country. Manaus, the city here, as well as São Paulo, the mega urban environment, were the 2 cities that suffered the worst from COVID up till this moment. So it's all connected. This would be an illegal gold mining in Munducuru, Indigenous land, which Brazilian groups as well as Greenpeace have documented over and over again, this illegal mining illegal logging, but the mining that destroys the water with mercury affects indigenous people's health and pretty much destroys the rivers. We're connected as well in our common home with 3 groups that are working mostly in the Amazon area, but some of them throughout Brazil. And one is the Indigenous Missionary Council called CIMI. And this is a council that was begun connected to the Brazilian bishops in 1972 during the time of the military dictatorship. And at that time, there was terrible degradation already of the Amazon. So we can just imagine from 1972 until 2021, how awful things have gotten. And HAPAM, which is the Pan-Amazonic Ecclesial Network, coordinates the Catholic Church's work in the Amazon area and other areas. So we have connections with these groups, trying to do what we can to pretty much denounce the horrific humanitarian environmental tragedy that's happening. And the Articulation of Indigenous People of Brazil, or APIB, is an alliance of indigenous communities and organizations from around the country. And they too are working to try to stem the tide of the structural collapse of the Amazon, and not just mining and logging, but agribusiness and invasions of indigenous lands. This year, 2021, the campaign of ecumenical fraternity, which the Brazilian bishops have every year, is a different theme. And this year, the campaign was on fraternity and dialogue, a commitment of love. And it was directly connected to the Week of the Indigenous People in Brazil. And the theme was peace for what was divided, that we come together in unity. And it was a connection with, of course, Fratelli Tutti, what fraternity really means and what dialogue really means, that it is not a romantic concept of sitting around in a circle and sharing, but it is hard work that includes truth-telling, historical truth-telling, and then working together to try to build something new. 2 voices of hope. Sonia Guajara is an indigenous woman and one of the leaders of APIB, and she has participated over the years in the UN climate change conferences and constantly denounced the indigenous people of Brazil. And this year she said, we are advancing, participating, discussing, and bringing our voice. The advancement is not preventing the destruction that is taking place by the groups intent on this, but the advancement is union of people, whether in the Amazon or not, and the continued raising awareness of society as a whole to support the process of indigenous land demarcation. Many indigenous lands, there are over 500 in Brazil, and many are not demarcated where the indigenous people have their own reserves, even though some of these reserves legally demarcated have been invaded and the government has not done anything about it. But in the reserves that have been protected, there is incredibly less violence. So it's indigenous working with their processes of resolving conflicts, resolving crimes, as well as healthy ways of living that they're trying to protect themselves, but also work to change society in this regard. And the current president and his government have been denounced for genocide at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And it relates to the destruction of indigenous land, the destruction of indigenous people, and complete negligence related to the health of all Brazilians with COVID-19. A young voice, Christian Guardiu, a 20-year-old indigenous Brazilian, has been using YouTube, again, as a weapon against discrimination and ethnocide. And his channel on YouTube, where he talks about his own indigenous culture, differences across indigenous lifestyles, and recent demonstrations where Brazilians have united in one cause to stop the invasions, to stop the destruction. And his most watched video on his channel, What's It Like to Be Indigenous in the 21st Century? Right now, I'm sure it has more than 40,000 views, but it's an attempt to build a culture of encounter, whether we meet in physically or whether we meet by media. And the call to Pope Francis, this culture of encounter that includes hard dialogues. So I'd like to just end a bit with Dom Pedro Casadaliga was a Brazilian bishop who died in 2020, and an incredible voice against the military dictatorship in Brazil and for human rights and rights of human rights of all people, indigenous people, and against the destruction of the Amazon. For the last 40 years, he has been an incredible voice. And at the end of the road, he says, they will ask me, have you lived? Have you loved? And not saying a word, I will open my heart full of names. And I think this is the culture of encounter that we're trying to work on. We're working with people who have names and have stories, and we're trying to bring the love to them. And Paulo Freire reminds us, love is an act of courage, not of fear. It is a commitment to others. This is the love that I think Fratelli Tutti is calling us to, this commitment to others. And no matter where oppressed people are found, the act of love is a commitment to their cause. So thank you, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for covering so many aspects of your work. And I was thinking, what brings you hope? But it's quite clear just watching the video and your engagement, that the engagement itself with others and the connection and the heroes in the culture bring you hope. I want to introduce now Iona Connor, who is a wonderful woman that I've come to meet recently. Well, I guess it's over a year ago we met, Iona. I was so impressed with Iona's work. Iona started her quest to find creative ways to live a natural life, starting with the birth of her first son 55 years ago. During the time in the United States when watching your own birth, because she wasn't knocked out, and then breastfeeding him immediately was a rare occurrence. These were uncommon activities here back then, and ever since that day, she has taken delight in thinking creatively about protecting the earth. And Iona has created an amazing network of people committed to the universe and to one another. And I'm going to ask you now to introduce your work, Iona, and tell us some of your stories. Would you unmute?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you all. You know, I was saying I feel embarrassed and guilty that I'm an American, because we know we've done a lot of damage all over the world, and our values have escaped our boundaries and ended up in other countries where they're trying to imitate us, and it's horrible. So I approach you all with great gratitude for your work in your countries, and I'm going to do my best. I was thinking as you were speaking, I hope you all know about George Floyd's death. My job is to try to get our knee off your necks. And I've been working on similar things for a long time. Back in 1995, I wrote a little tiny book called The Order of the Earth. And actually, I thought of it as sort of a religious order of people who would cherish the earth so much that they would knock themselves out trying to protect it. And I was very anti-technology then. I'm still mildly anti-technology. So I wrote it by hand. I just printed it all out. And it's made on 100% unbleached, recycled paper. And a little team of us made 11,000 of these cut with paper cutters. This is tiny. This is like 2 inches by 3.5 inches. We had a paper cutter, we had a stapler, we folded them, we clipped them. We made 11,000 and gave almost all of them away. Until the time one of our friends was at a festival and he saw, oh, I had given away the originals, so anybody anywhere could copy of them and make more. And this is part of my talk, is how to reach people who are unaware. Because, you know, we can sit here and talk all day and we know the problems and we're active and, you know, we wear ourselves out trying to make change. And other people just go la-di-da down the street. They have no idea what's going on. So when one of my friends saw a box full of these that we had not made, I knew this little book had a life of its own. So I stopped doing that. And I've spent most of my life trying to figure out, how do you get people to care? We care. I look back and I try to remember, like, my mom was caring, but I want to know, how do we get other people to care? So a lot of my life, I've been giving talks, I've been writing little newsletters, and 25 years ago, I spoke at a high school science class. And at the end of the class, the teacher said to her students, "What did you learn?" And one young man raised his hand and he summarized my whole life. Think and act, man. Think and act. So what I would say now at this time is, think and act, people. Think and act. And I would like to share the screen just for a minute, because I'm kind of an earthy, low-level person. Even though I have now a wonderful international group, I remain a real basic, simple person. And when I married my husband, John, 30 years ago, he died in my arms 2 years ago, Wednesday. But he was a Jesuit, and I have Quaker roots, and I'd never heard the word Jesuit. I had no idea what that meant. So I learned, we're talking about faith interacting. Well, that's what we did for our life together. And he was very brilliant. And he gave us the ideas of starting a nonprofit called Grassroots Coalition for Environmental and Economic Justice. He wanted to change the whole world. And I fell in love with him because all I wanted to do was save a farm in New Jersey. So anyhow, that's a little bit of my personal life. And now I want to share the screen. I think it's not working. Marita, can you fiddle around with that?
I think you can share.
Oh yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Thank you, sorry. So I made this dress totally by hand. It's the one I'm wearing now. I call it my earth dress. And this was our home out in Pennsylvania. And I had been given a sewing machine, a little Kenmore sewing machine for high school graduation. And it wore out. It just wouldn't go anymore. I gave it a good life because I love to sew. And when it died, I tried to get a treadle machine, you know, where your feet do all the labor, and the belt wasn't right. So I got rid of that. And the next thing I did, I got out needle and thread. And this dress is totally hand stitched. It took a long time. You can see my little stitches, the hem and the seams. But it was a very quiet and peaceful activity with zero fossil fuels, zero nuclear energy. And
Love it.
Because I like to sew, it was fun for me. So what I'm trying to do is get people to think a little bit about what do they like to do? How can they use their skills and talents to reduce fossil fuel use? And now my little book, my little tiny book has grown. I will show you what it looks like now. Whoops, wrong one, hang on. You know, I often have trouble with these things.
Just take your time.
Yeah, thank you. I think I have to open one thing and find others attached to it.
Okay.
That is not what I want to show you. I had these all open. Oh my goodness gracious. Here we go. I found it. Now I have to figure out how to get it to you all. I hope I didn't just close you out.
No.
All right, let me close. I know it's here. Sorry. This is so peculiar because I just, all right, I'm gonna try this. Ah, here we go. So this is what I've been doing for 13 years. It hasn't always been this colorful or this good looking or this interesting, but this is the last one. I just finished it and sent it out August 14th. Groundswell News, a celebration of youth. Our motto, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. Our slogan, the way forward, cycle back to basics. And this vibrant image is what was on the front of the latest IPCC report. So our front page is the IPCC report. And I'm sure you all know Greta Thunberg. She was right, our house is on fire. And then we go through a little bit of definition about who we are. And this is the rest of that story from the IPCC report. This is really frightening how the Amazon has flipped from a carbon sink to a source. And more about the heat, the extreme heat, not just here, but all over the world. I want to tell a little story, but I'm afraid I'm going to lose this. So I'm going to stop here because this is not an interesting page. I was an air pollution inspector in the heart of New Jersey. And for those of you who don't live in the United States, New Jersey has a reputation for being a pretty stinky little state. And so I'm an air pollution inspector. In 1988, I'm out coming back from an inspection, and my car broke down on Route 287, which is like a 6-lane highway, 3 in each direction, going really, really fast, 50 miles an hour. And I'm sitting there waiting for somebody to come rescue me. I had already been in smoke school where we learned how to evaluate smokestacks, vertical smokestacks. We had to know the density of the air, the plume, the pollution. We had to know the density in order to write violations on vertical stacks in businesses. And I'm sitting there thinking, what about all these horizontal stacks? What about all the horizontal tailpipes from all these cars and trucks whizzing past me? And I'm thinking, if you combine all the vertical stacks on businesses, homes, and schools everywhere in the world, and you combine the horizontal stacks on every car, truck, bus in the world, in 1988, I said, we are cooking the earth. So I've been at this quite a while. Anyhow, now let me go back to my newspaper here. Okay. We have a wonderful vice president, and he's from India, and he is an extraordinarily talented, eloquent, involved climate activist who's been to both the poles, and he's started many environmental organizations in India. He got an interview with my old friend, Dr. Michael Mann, probably the most famous climate scientist in the world. because my husband, John, wanted to go meet Michael Mann when he started getting interested in climate change. So we lived in Pennsylvania. We met him. He was extremely gracious and friendly. And even now, when I get stuck on a climate issue, I can email him. So Raj interviewed him. Then I pick up stories all over the place. And this one was about a win against a fossil fuel company and bikes. You know, we don't need electric cars, we need bikes. Deep sea, oh my gosh, this is really, really horrible. Deep sea mining coming up, they're already at it. So one of my friends investigated this issue. It's just horrible. I had seen a mural in a school a long time ago. I was a newspaper reporter, an education reporter back in Frederick, Maryland. You know, it's funny, in the COVID workshop, they were talking about Fort Detrick in Frederick. Well, I lived there. We protested for peace at Fort Detrick. They're thinking that's where the pandemic started. So anyhow, I saw a mural about the deep, deep sea and the creatures so far under the ocean that I still remembered that. And when I heard about deep sea mining, I got really upset. So I try to publish things that either I get upset about or I love. And now, of course, we probably all know that leaving nature alone is the best thing to do. We don't need all this technology. To save rainforest, one of my friends wrote this: to save the rainforest, think like a rainforest. And here's a man whose story he wrote about. More wilderness coming up. Oh, I love Africa. I have totally fallen in love with the entire continent of Africa, having met a couple of wonderful African environmentalists. And this story is by a man who runs a tourist company in Uganda, and he takes the best pictures. So this is what he does. And my subscriber list is about, I would say, half American and half Africans. And I'm just trying to educate people about the wonderful things the Africans are doing. This picture I adore. I have a section called Ending Inequality. This is the start of Ending Inequality. Swimming. These are just things I find and put together, trying to be hopeful. One of our board members is this man in Cameroon, and he is a phenomenal fundraising man, and he started a technology center where they're doing solar energy and especially working with women. And this is what his school looks like. He just got a UNICEF grant for $100,000 to work on girls and women's empowerment and safety. So we're working with him. And this is an explanation I hope all my American readers will read, because it talks about how difficult life is when their electricity gets cut off, if they even have any. And he says, like towards the end somewhere, he says how much admiration he has for anybody in Africa who gets a college degree, because you can't count on your electricity. This is a dynamite woman on our advisory board in Uganda, and she has a really, really wonderful group called Wasina, Women and Children's Empowerment Center in Africa. Going circular, this is one way out of our mess. And my friend here in the United States, Jeanette Bartelt, we've known her forever. She helped us run a little clothing business. We were reaching out to churches and universities east of the Mississippi for several years selling organic cotton, non-sweatshop clothes and showing videos about the sweatshop workers. And Jeanette had been in a sewing factory, so she knew how to help us out. And this is her ad. She's starting a little cooperative business and making things out of scrap materials. I'm not sure if you read both sides of the environmental movement, but I would like to finish this up and then talk to you about that. Here we are. I put us in my newspaper. This is a man, one of our friends, whose biological father is Haitian. So he and I, after he wrote his book, we started calling churches all over the United States to see if people would buy his book. He would donate his royalties straight to a group in Haiti where they are working directly with the people. So that is my newspaper. But I do want to mention something about Bright Green Lies. It's a book I advertised here because Derek Jensen has been like an earth first type of guy. Direct action, cut off the pipeline, do whatever you can to stop the destruction. So he's not a big fan of solar and wind. And this book goes through one environmental solution after the next about how they destroy the earth while they're trying to save the earth. So it's a little bit of a conundrum that we're in. And personally, I think about like regenerative farming and things like that. Now I want to show you my latest idea. This is just another effort to try to reach out to brand new people whom I don't know. And it's going to be called the Do Something Club. I forgot to tell you that a long time ago, I want to say 35 years ago, I was so upset about nuclear energy and gas and oil energy use in my home that I decided to stop ironing anything. So my mom had given me a beautiful, like Lord and Taylor red blouse, and I wore it to speak at a professional women's club, but I had not ironed it. So I wonder what they thought of me, but that was the point. It's like, we don't need to iron. We don't need hair dryers. It's like, just let your hair be. And when I first started, I had a little bit of nursing knowledge, and I was a nurse and I was a teacher, and I was thinking and I was reading, and I put together a little show. I was a first grade teacher, so we did a lot of show and tell, and I would take items and go to make a little date in the public library to do a talk. Might have only 5 or 6 people, but I'm out there talking to them. And this is going to be something where I'm willing to go out and talk to people in person. This is designed for people who are concerned about climate change or plastic in the ocean or social justice, and they don't know what to do. So I'm going to talk to them about some things I have found in my life that I'm happy with. For instance, deodorant. Even though Tom's is a natural company, look, it's plastic, it's manufactured. I've learned that I can use baking soda for a deodorant, and all what comes in this cardboard box would last a year. So I just make a little paste, get a little makeup sponge, and that's my deodorant. Again, no ironing. These are hankies. This was a nice old-fashioned hanky. This one is made from a sheet. Let me get this a little bit bigger for you. This one is hand-stitched, and one of my high school friends made that for me. Same with napkins. Here in the United States, we use paper napkins almost all the time. My friend gave me this one. Another friend gave me about a dozen of these. This is scraps from the very same dress I'm wearing, and this is just another scrap, just cloth napkins. Moving along, looking at packaging. I sold Mary Kay for a while, trying to earn some money, which was a failure. But when I opened that lipstick, I thought, this is grossly overpackaged. I've been in electroplating companies. They're hideous. So I just, grabbed another lipstick. I don't wear lipstick anymore, but just to look, I just want people to look and think. When I met John, he had only one pen, a fountain pen. I still have it. He didn't stay on that for long, but it's an idea. When things get ragged, just keep using them. Keep using them. Doesn't matter. And here's threadbare. This is the partner to that napkin above. Threadbare, it's okay. And oh, that's my timer. I think, Marita, my time is up. Is that right?
Yeah, so you can take a couple more minutes,
Okay.
Iona.
Okay, thank you. Drying clothes. This was a nice outdoor line John made for me when we lived in the country, and now I'm in an apartment. You see, it's the same towel, and I love to swim. That's my swimming stuff. Even something simple like ice cream. They had each cone wrapped. Now, again, I feel really guilty, and I'm going to stop this because I want to say something else, but I feel so guilty having ice cream. I mean, my friends in Africa, they don't even have a refrigerator, much less a freezer. So please forgive me for being an American. Okay, quickly, I want to read something that Derek Jensen wrote in his book. Here is a set of guiding questions or principles by which any bright green technology should be evaluated. First, there is the technological thing itself, whether it's a photovoltaic cell, a windmill, a battery. What is it? What is it made of? Where do these materials come from, and how are they extracted from the earth? What harms do these extractions cause? Who suffers these harms? What infrastructures are required to support these extractions? What harms are caused by those infrastructures? Who suffers these harms? All of which brings us to Aldo Leopold's reverent statement, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. This is the measure by which we should judge bright green and all technologies. It's the measure by which we should judge our actions and our lives. And I think that's a good place to end.
Thank you so much, Iona.
You're
For a
welcome.
wonderful presentation. You have brought many people together who are doing projects all over Africa. And they're part of the coalition. And I know when we meet monthly or bi-monthly, they share many of their projects. And I've been so inspired by the youth in particular in Africa and in
They are
Zimbabwe.
amazing. And I usually have more stories about them, but the HEAT and the IPCC report,
Yes.
I didn't have that many, but I often have 5 or 6 stories straight out of Africa, original stories you won't see anywhere else. And I did make a little, I typed up my address, my email address in case anybody wants it, and I'm just going to copy it and paste it into the chat.
Good, thank you.
Sure.
Before we go further, I do want to ask if our panelists will allow me to share their emails with our participants, because there are one of the things that I'm hoping is that some of our participants will invite you to share these same presentations in other settings. And so that's just one positive outcome that I immediately see. But I think that each of your presentations has had a very deep impact on us. And I want to ask, we have a few questions from our audience. And let me just look in the chat. I also have some. Just go up here. Joanne, how do you respond in your restorative justice process to families who have been victimized or who experience themselves as being victimized? Could you describe that process maybe a little bit in more detail?
Sure. So we have what we call a lot of pre-circles before we would bring a victim and an offender together. And what we've worked with, some people bring to our center, they bring cases of crime. And sometimes judges send us cases of crime to use a restorative justice process. And so in the pre-circle, we work a lot with listening to people's stories, their narratives, having them express their anger, their fear, their grief, and their desire for vengeance. And through a couple of different processes, and we've had people say, I want that person to rot in jail. I want that person to suffer more than me. But sometimes you are able to ask, we ask, how will that help you move forward? And people say, I'll feel better if they suffer more than me. And sometimes the person is already in jail suffering more than they. So we start asking folks about, how is your health? Are you able to sleep? Are you nervous since all this happened? And inevitably they share that they can't sleep, they have difficulty sleeping, that they're just not the same person they were before this happened. And so we try to work on vengeance and the person being in jail. How will that help you? And we're not always successful, but many times we are, so that the person really thinks about, well, it'll help me just feel like I took revenge. And then how is that going to help you move forward with your life? And pretty much then people through, it's a process. And particularly, we don't meet with victims of a homicide or something very serious right away. The person needs to grieve and deal with some of their feelings. But we talk about how all these feelings are normal, but this process perhaps will help you feel lighter after the process and feel that it's behind you. And there's a lot of research that shows that that's true. Restorative justice in the beginning was based on helping the offender move forward, the victim move forward with their life. And then they saw it has great potential as well, working with victims and offenders together, that people feel like, okay, that I've dealt with this, we've reconciled in some way. And it's not a concept of reconciliation where we're all in harmony together. It's nothing like that. It's that I heard your story, you heard mine, and we've come to some kind of restoration, repair of harm, and we can move forward. So we sometimes ask folks to talk to people who were victims, who felt the same way, and they can tell them how the process was. So it's a matter of people not denying. And I think sometimes, because we do work with forgiveness and reconciliation, when we give talks, people feel even guiltier that they can't forgive or they can't move forward. So we actually do the process. We do a lot of process work with people, collectively or individually.
Thank you. I have so many questions for all of you. We're not going to be able to address all of them. But one more for you, Joanne, and that is, it seems like this circle process that you use for purposes other than restorative justice, and ways of creating community and solidarity so that people do not feel alone in their situations. And I'm just wondering if you would be willing to give some trainings in this area online, or if you do already, for the use of this method. Well, it's really creating a circle where people have voice and are able to feel connected eventually to other people in that circle. I may be simplifying it, but do you do trainings online for other people in other areas? I mean, globally.
We do. Most of it is in Brazil, but now that we've been, that we're all online and haven't been able to physically go back full time, we've had lots of people from other countries, and we've worked with organizations online to deal with conflicts. We've worked on circles of dialogue where there's a lot of intolerance, like within a church community where they want to build up tolerance. So we have done online a number of things. For me, it is always better in person, but I think that goes for most of what we do. But online, it's pretty incredible how you can establish, because we don't just do it one time usually with groups. We come back and we go continue the discussion. So you literally can build up some kind of solidarity or some kind of contact online that, I mean, I'm looking at everyone who's here today who spoke, like, it makes me feel like we're connected in some way, not the same as if we were in person, but you can build these connections. So yes, we already do this online, many of the things.
I actually was thinking of train the trainers so that it wasn't doing the circle specifically online, but for people working in different parts of the world, train the trainer.
Yes,
so
and we do that. We do that. We're forming facilitators online as well. Yeah.
Great. I want to go to Nicole. There's a question about, Nicole, the access to water for the Indigenous farmers in rural areas. Could you speak to that a bit? Is this part of the problem why they leave for the cities? Is the lack of access to water?
Sure, Marita. Well, the principal problem that I present in the first video, I'm sorry that the sound was not correct, but especially in the rural areas, in the rural area that I work, that is in Tigua, in the Andean region, they, post the colonialism, the territories were given to indigenous peoples, but these territories were not have the access to public services. So now the indigenous communities are going to the cities to find and also to give a project and go do conversation with government, local governments to give this project. But in other hand, it is not a project, it's a human right. The water is a human right that everyone have to get access. So it's really difficult, the problem that we have, especially in the rural areas, in the lands, because what happened when the indigenous communities migrate to the cities, they have the same problem, because we assume that because they migrate to the cities, they have water, but it's not true. They didn't go to the cities. They go to the peripheries, to the around to the cities, periferias in Espanol, around to the cities. So they have the same problem. They have water, but it's not clean. They have water, but it's no access to go to the bathroom or the kitchen and open it's not the reality. They have to go to take to wait that a car give water when they don't have, or to continue giving this problem also in the neighborhoods that they are. So it's a problem that especially indigenous communities suffer here in the cities when they migrate, and they have the same problem in the rural areas, because the climate change is really, really perjudicate to these communities. As you see in the video, the ground, the soil is fertile, but what happened? They don't have the riego. They don't have the to distribute water for all the natural resources. They don't have. So for this reason, they don't have for produce natural resources. They don't have to produce agriculture. So they have to migrate to the cities. And this is the reality that they have as well there. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And Liam, I wanted to ask a couple of questions that have processed on YouTube. One has to do with the interfaith group that you're working with. And is there a growing sense of closeness, of forming a commitment whereby people who are different from each other will respond to one another's needs if someone is in particular need? Is it becoming a close community? Liam, you need to unmute.
I think it's a mixed bag in terms of response. You know, there's a whole context here of small minorities of Christians and Hindus feeling very vulnerable, very discriminated against, and so that's a reality. And I think there's also a reality, and is in the news this week with the whole breakdown in Afghanistan, the extremism that we've seen for the last 40, 50 years has really had a very profound negative effect in terms of fear and real narrowing of very extreme positions. So all of that is in the background, and that colors how people relate. So interfaith itself is very difficult anyway. And I think in different contexts, you know, depending on majority situation, depending on poverty and social stigma, it depends. So I think it's quite difficult in many ways because of those experiences. And yes, what keeps me going is the positive experiences, that there are really good people on all sides working together, and that's where the hope is. You have the violence, you have the extremism, you have discrimination for sure, and that's very painful. So all we can do is try to find out people who are working together, who are of a like mind, and that's where the energy is. And I have experiences of that. I have some of the other as well, but that's what you keep on trying to build up. You try to make links. So it is slow. It is difficult. There's historical resentment and fear on all sides, and it's particularly difficult. But nonetheless, it is happening, and people work together, and people are building up relationships and working together on these common issues, and that's where the hope lies. And I think that's where we have to try and keep on promoting.
Thank you. And I wanted to also ask you about two other critical problems that you brought up. And one is the high temperatures. And are there ways, well, I'll mention both of them, high temperatures, and then of course the pollution of the water. Are there ways that communities can support each other in or share resources there, protection from the heat, or access to water, sharing some clean water access?
Yeah, again, major issues. I suppose it's already a very, very hot climate. So if you have constant increase every year, it's just going to be worse and worse. Again, the complete almost cutting of forest cover has done enormous damage. So that the government are talking about a 10 billion tree planting project. I'm not sure will it happen, but at least it's a a step in the right direction. So planting of trees and protecting what's just remaining would be a very important thing. In terms of water, yeah, we have attempted some low cost type of filter system. The biosand water filters are very cheap and quite successful. They do filter water quite well. So that's something we have been looking at. Again, I suppose is political pressure. I mean, I've mentioned the city I'm in, where all the 5 filter plants are just not functioning. They have been, so that's a criminal neglect by the government, local government. So it's political pressure, it's local pressure, working with local authorities, trying to get that type of pressure going. That's the only way that can be achieved. The pollution is horrendous. I mean, most of the household, industrial sewage, agriculture is going straight into the waterways, and it's horrendous. There is almost little or no decent septic or disposal systems for sewage and industrial waste, and that's just appalling when you think of all of the chemicals that goes in. So it is probably the biggest issue, the water quality, and people are just dying at a very young age, especially poor people, because of that. So those are the big issues, and it's difficult to know where to start, because I suppose the context is a country of 220 million people, the 6th biggest population in the world, with enormous problems of poverty, injustice, environmental issues, extremism. So all that together, and the COVID has been horrendous for the last, in terms of the deaths haven't been too bad, but in terms of the unemployment and the daily wage earners not being able to work. So the combination of issues is enormous for a country, and corruption is a major problem, messing up all of that. So yeah, it's all you can do is work for the signs of hope, that at least the government are speaking the right language. We hosted Environmental Day in 5th of June, which is about restoring ecosystems. So again, at least the attention was brought to it, and people are beginning to become aware on the ground. And for the first time I've seen it before COVID 2 years ago, there was marches on the issue of climate change and forcing the government to try and act. So again, it's just a very slow process, and trying to find like-minded people and work on these issues. But the challenges are enormous.
Thank you. And Iona, can we get access to your journal? Would you speak to that?
Yes, I put the email for it in the
good.
chat.
In the chat?
I don't like Facebook, but I check my emails a lot.
Okay.
So it's groundswellnews@pa.net. And I also put, for my little do something club, I made a new email, do something @pa.net. It's like, do any, once you start, this feels good, this is right, and you keep going. So the idea, just start them off. But Marita, I had my hand up here.
I'm sorry.
Because I wanted to tell Liam and others that one of my friends has specialized in, he's in Africa, in Zambia. He has specialized in solar cookers, and you can boil water with soil cookers, and to some degree you can prevent some illnesses just by having good solar cookers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we'll put you and Liam in touch with each other.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, Marita.
Wonderful. So we are so deeply indebted to you for the work you do and for bringing us so close to people all over the world who are suffering, and you're suffering with them. And so we know that Pope Francis invites us to encounter those who are different from ourselves. And I want to invite all of us to do that in our daily lives, to cross the boundary, move across the room, to move across the city, to meet other people and to hear their stories, and to form circles, to watch this video and to be moved to action. As Joanne said, following the principles of see, judge, act. So I'm going to ask each of you to do something, and then we're going to end with a song to lift our spirit in unity. What I would like you to do in the next couple of hours is, if you have any, I'd like you to make a recommendation or a suggestion for our global interfaith conference. If there is anything that you feel that we should promote, we should stand for, we should publicize, would you please send it to me? We're going to have a publication, more than one, coming out from this conference. And how do we move forward, given your rich experiences? So it's 3 o'clock now, and I can't thank you enough. And we all are so grateful, both to His Holiness Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar for their communion and their reminding us that we cannot, either we come together and unite, or we perish. And so now I'm going to ask Hudai to show the video of the song for our closing, and we'll be in touch. Thanks so much. You're marvelous people, every one of you.
Thank you, Marita.
Let our hearts not be hardened to those living on the margins. There is room at the table for everyone. This is where it all begins. This is how we gather in. There is room at the table for everyone. Too long we have wandered, burdened and undone, but there is room at the table for everyone. Let us sing the new word in. This is how it all begins. There is room at the table for everyone. There is room for us all, and no gift is too small. There is room at the table for everyone. There is enough if we share. Come on, hold up a chair. There is room at the table for everyone. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, there is room at the table for everyone. Here and now we can be the beloved community. There is room at the table for everyone. There is room for us all, and no gift is too small. There is room at the table for everyone. There's enough if we share. Come on, pull up a chair. There is room at the table for everyone.
Bye, everyone.